I want to tell you about my conversation with Tom Nash because I had such a great time talking to this person. And it surprised me a little bit because I thought it was going to be a little bit of a heavy chat because he's been through quite a lot. He's gone through quite a bit of adversity because at a pretty young age, at the age of 19, he became a quadruple amputee. He lost all of his limbs pretty much in one go. And that's quite a lot immediately to take in. But, you know, speaking to him now, years on, it's been more than 15 years since that happened. And the way that he has made the most out of every opportunity in his life is just really inspiring.
Just saying that, by the way, it just makes you think, wow.
Yeah. But
you'll
feel
four of his limbs.
Even more so when you hear from him directly and you hear his attitude, you hear what he's managed to do with his life. He's big into music. He is a DJ. And we'll get into that a little bit. But I want to start with the beginning of his story because, as we mentioned, he was only 19 when he contracted a disease called meningococcal. He said it has an incubation period of 7 to 10 days. So initially, he didn't actually know anything was wrong, and he didn't know he had it at first. But eventually, it slowly started to present symptoms and then very rapidly got rough.
But when it starts to present symptoms, it gets pretty rough. So it's flu-like symptoms, but it's very exaggerated. So, you know, I had fevers and I was getting up in the middle of the night and crawling to the bathroom and I was passing out. And then I had to call my stepsister the next morning and try and get her to take me to a doctor. And it was just lucky that she took me to a hospital because if she hadn't, I would have been dead like 10 minutes later or something like that.
Whoa.
Every time we talk to someone who has gone through something this difficult, there's that same matter-of-fact tone about what they've gone through. And we comment on it every time, but I have to comment on it again because he just says it almost casually there, just so matter of fact.
You process it, don't you? You have to deal. You have to find a way of kind of coming to terms with it.
Right. Of course, it's not going to continue to create emotional angst or anguish in you constantly as the years go on. At some point, it sort of fades away. But yeah, it still strikes me every time, despite that. And so he gets to the hospital, as we've heard there. He is pretty out of it at this point. In fact, he told me he didn't remember much. He said years later, years after this all happened, he's going in for an outpatient appointment and a doctor runs up to him and says, "Are you Tom Nash? I'm the doctor that admitted you." So he's learning for the first time years later what some of those initial interactions were when he first went to the hospital. But of course, he got some pretty harrowing news.
I was in a coma for a couple of weeks, and then I came out of the coma, and I still had my arms and legs, although because the meningococcal causes septicemia, I had gangrene on my hands and feet. So they tried to save my limbs as the septicemia had spread throughout my body. And then when it became obvious that saving the limbs wasn't an option, then they first took my legs. And then weeks later, they took my arms. And I guess the option you're pointing to is, well, it's kind of a funny story because the doctor who gave me, I guess, the ultimatum about my arms at first made it seem like a choice. He told me that I could lose them and I would be able to live with prosthetics and carry on with my life. Or I could keep them. And I just said, well, what's the catch if I keep them? And he said, well, you'll die. And, I mean, at first I thought he just had an amusing yet blunt way of conveying bad news. But when I look back on it, I think he was giving me a choice, you know. Like, I mean, if I really didn't want to go on living without my arms, I kind of had an exit clause.
It struck me how important that phrasing was and how important it was that he had a choice. And he did say that as well because he said, during that time, you're in so much pain that you don't see what's next. You can't see ahead to the fact that eventually you're going to recover however many years later. And to be able to know that he made that choice was actually really important to him.
Yeah.
So just as opposed to saying, like, listen, we've got to do this, we've got to amputate your limbs, to phrase it like that and say you have a choice to live, but you have to want it, is actually really powerful.
And in that regard, it helped him mentally prepare for life post-operation as well.
Exactly.